Hey guys, it is November 10th, 2018. This is your brother, Vulcan Wolverine, Kyle. It's about 4:30 in the morning where I am. I woke up at like 2 because my sleeping schedule is just, way off, dealing with this stuff. Um, and let me open up a page real quick so I can see the chat because it doesn't come into my Google Hangouts. Still haven't figured that out yet. But let me go ahead and get that opened up. And tonight, or this morning, I guess it's this morning, it's Saturday morning. I'm just gonna go through a James Giordano seminar on predictive neurotechnology. Because the people who are involved in this, like, because he's an advisor to the Pentagon on neurotechnology, neuroscience, and neuroweapons. And he's right now involved in a project in the UK, like an actual mind mapping project in the UK. So it would really behoove us, to see what these people are talking about, to see what they're doing seminars and presentations on. Let me go ahead and see if I can look up my own live stream real quick. Let's see. Videos. Here, okay. I'm gonna open that up. Looks like it is 4:30 in the morning. So okay, there's 3 people in there. So hey everybody, I'm gonna be coming back to this page, but basically I'm just gonna be going through this. It's about an hour-long video seminar that James Giordano did, and I'm just gonna stop it whenever he says anything that kind of has to do with what we're going through, and just try and kind of get more foundational proof out there of what's happening to us. I'm doing pretty good. The grounding, still doing the grounding. I got 2 straps on my leg, and it's really working to stop the remote neural manipulation pulses, like in my torso, my back, and my hips, and also my jaw. So I've been kind of healing up. It's pretty cool. I know it's not an end-all be-all. It's not, because I still am getting voice to skull. And they're hitting me externally in the back of the neck. My attackers are hitting me externally in the back of the neck and like the head and stuff like that. So they're switching things up. But it's always nice. It's always really nice to keep your attackers on their heels. You do things to defend yourself that kind of can stop a certain type of protocol that they're trying to run you into the ground with. And then they have to switch things up. And then you maybe go back to another kind of defense, and always keep them on the back foot. That it really helps. It helps so that they just don't move forward with whatever their protocols are, that they have to kind of switch things up and rethink things. Give me 1 second, guys. I'm going to go ahead and start up that video. Let me go back to the chat page and see who's here. Yeah, I don't know how many people are going to come, because it is, Saturday morning at 4:30 in the morning, but I kind of wanted to do a live stream because I know that a lot of targeted individuals, we're up late. Like, I think that, hold on 1 second. I think that, like, not only through them my attackers messing up my sleep patterns and things like that, I think that I have subconsciously started staying up at night more. When I was a kid, I really was nocturnal, but like then as I grew up, I had to go to work and everything like that, so I stay up during the day. But with this, I feel like it's more comfortable when you stay up at night, because when I go walk my dog, I know that most gang stalking, they're going to do it when it's convenient for them. Like they're going to walk their dog at the same time as you, or the sirens in the background, it's going to be cops that are out during the day. So late at night, you have to get the really hardcore gang stalkers intruding in your life. So I find it kind of buffers the gang stalking out a little bit if you do things late at night. But let me go ahead and start on that video. First, I did want to show y'all something real quick. I'm gonna take a little drink of Dr. Pepper. It's really nice to wake up and not have this pulsing pain in my back and my hips. Like, I mean, it's still going on. I still feel kind of tired. You know, they're giving me headaches and stuff like that from external hits. So I'm not just like, oh, I'm cured or whatever. You know, but it's nice. It's nice. I don't feel like I'm like waking up going, oh, it feels like I'm dying. It feels like my body's about to give out. Like now I'm waking up and I'm like, oh, this still sucks. I have V2K and stuff like that. But I have some energy to do some stuff. And right now I've just been kind of healing up and enjoying not being in constant pain all the time, playing Assassin's Creed Odyssey. In the game, you get to go around and hunt these cultists. Like it's this cult that you have to go around and assassinate them. So I find that pretty cathartic, you know, because basically the people that are doing this to us are, you know, hardcore cultists. Yeah, they may not dress up in robes and go to, you know, worshiping parties or anything like that, but you know, they have cult beliefs. They have groupthink beliefs that murdering somebody 24 hours a day and getting automated software to hurt us is like they've just got to do it because that's what everybody else is doing. That's what's making the money, and that's what's somehow going to be good for our country to torture and murder Americans. Yeah. Hey, Paul. Paul says, I hate sleep deprivation. I do too. I slept a long time today, though. Like I mean, I kind of laid in bed for about 3 hours with Dave Case's CD on. And I have to tell you all the truth. And like my attackers like this, the grounding of my left leg is stopping a lot of the pulse pain, but my attackers are struggling. They are struggling to push back on that and to get some of these pain signals still through. Now, as long as I have the, you know, as long as I have the grounding on my leg, it's good. Like right now, I'm not getting pulse pain. Maybe a little bit. Maybe they're getting a little bit through, but compared to what it was, it's like maybe 1%. They're getting 1% of pain through remote neural manipulation pulse pain. So it's nice, but they are the danger with this. See, on their side, like I'll explain this to you. My attackers, when I find something that really works well for defense, they scramble. They scramble because that's the most dangerous thing to them. If I go to my psychiatrist and my parents and I say, oh yeah, I started grounding my left leg and everything went away. It stopped this stuff. It stopped it. Then they're going to be like, whoa, he's doing this thing and it stopped that. So my attackers, when I do find something that really works, they try hard to push it back, to like to pump up the power, to pump up the amplitude of the signal, to do everything they can because they know I tell the truth and they know I'll be like, oh, well, it didn't work completely. They're kind of pushing some of it through. And they also know that I do these videos. So if y'all do some of the stuff that's really helping me, it's going to really help y'all. So they want it to be kind of like, well, I'm like, oh, well, yeah, it works, but not completely and stuff like that. But this, I'm telling y'all, this leg grounding, definitely try it. Like it's really helping me. It really has a lot to do with how they are pushing pain into our body. It has a lot to do with it because we're getting brain entrainment, nervous system entrainment, and then I think everything. This is the conclusion I'm coming to, and I'm trying to study a little bit more about just normal signals in the body. Like when you think a thought, when you have a visualization in your mind, how does that travel through the body? Does it just stay in the mind, like the neurons in the mind think it, and then it presents itself in the mind? Or does that signal have to travel down your extremities, just like a point of pain that you have from like getting hit or something like that? Does it all work the same? Does it all have to travel in this kind of loop? So this is opened my eyes to you know, how this works, how this brain entrainment and nervous system entrainment works. I'm going to be studying just the body electric in general a lot, and that's going to tell us a lot of how to bring this stuff down, just like the left leg grounding. Let me go ahead, guys. I did want to show y'all one thing before I start the article. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen real quick, and then I'll go to the article. Not the article. It's actually a YouTube video. It's actually a seminar. So I wanted to show y'all this. I'm definitely going to get one. This is lessemf.com, guys. For people who have not come here, and they have a lot of great stuff. This is the balaclava. I have 3 of those, and then the brain coat. I have 4 of those, and so I wear that as headgear, and then I have one of the hats. And this stuff does work. Doesn't work 100%, but it does buffer out. It does attenuate, you know, some of the EMF coming at our head. But I wanted to show y'all this. This heel ground. It's like $5.95. I think you just get one, but I'm going to go ahead and buy 2 and put them on both feet. And I think that we all need to be getting some grounding stuff for our feet, because I think that it's going to have a similar effect. You know, the guys who say, the guys and girls who say, you know, when they go out and they just get their bare feet on like grass and dirt, and that really works, like actual natural grounding. That's exactly right. That does really help, because it's grounding out your body. You know, all these positive ions, because we're basically just filling up with positive ions. It's like a cycle of positive ions in our body from the directed energy weapon attacks. So when you're grounding, all those positive ions are grounding out on the natural ground, and then you are left with a lot of negative ions, which are healthy for the body. So I'm going to be getting 2 of these. So when I go out, I can, you know, actually ground my feet. All right, let me just go ahead and go to the video, guys. I'm just going to go through the whole thing, and I'll probably stop it a lot, because then I want to be like, you know, I want to, you know, let y'all know how it relates to us. This guy, I mean, this guy is and I hope it's loud enough. Let's start into it, and I'll kind of talk as we go. I really hope it's loud enough.
Types of technologies,
yeah, that's good,
may in fact be weaponizable. And what I mean by weaponizable is that they can be used in the classical definition of a weapon, which is a means of contending against another so as to determine, access, or decrease their will, morale, or intention.
So I'm just gonna, I mean, just the first thing he said is so important. I mean, this guy is an advisor to the Pentagon on neurotechnology and neuroweapons. He's saying neurotechnology can be weaponized. Now, when he's saying this in the seminar, he already knows that it has been weaponized, but he's probably signed what are those things where you can't talk about certain things that are classified as national security and stuff like that. So they're, you know, the DOD and the Pentagon are probably letting him come out and talk about this stuff, as long as he talks about it as like a future thing, as this stuff can be, it might be in the future, and we got to think about this stuff for the future. I think that's not just a loophole that he's personally using. I think he's made an agreement with the people that he's worked with to make sure that people don't think, hey, we're using this in society and it's being used a lot. Talk about it as if it's a future thing, and then you can talk about it and you can kind of prime people for getting ready for this technology. So let's go on. But I mean, he says a lot in his seminars and things he talks about. This is a guy he writes articles. I've gone through a lot of articles that he is, you know, said stuff about the Cuban embassy attack. Actually, you know, somebody sent me an article where he actually gave his opinion about the Cuban embassy attack. Let me see if I can find that. I might not be able to find it for the end of this video, but I might do a follow-up, just a short video where he actually chimes in on that.
Or wage harm. Now that said, that doesn't necessarily mean that all the things that I'm going to talk to you about tonight are in the general employ of governments and or the government, because then I have to kill you before we leave. And number two, I'm going to also tell you that in certain instances, some of the work represents what we call trajectory science, which means that it's on the trajectory of being almost out of the oven, but it's at a pre-translational stage in terms of the way we're actually going to use this operationally. That doesn't mean it's not going to happen. That doesn't mean it's science fiction. It means that we're not quite there yet. And the third concept goes along.
So when he says we're not quite there yet, he's lying, because they are doing research and development on it. But in his head, what he's saying is, okay, it's not really out of the oven yet because we're not done with experimentation, but it's already out of the oven in the way that they are doing research and development on innocent citizens, basically based on a lottery system. If you have a surgery on your stomach, or you have a surgery on your chest or on your heart or anything like that, or you have some kind of surgery, you can be implanted. We're all getting nanotechnology and nano particulates from chemtrails and other forms of toxins put in our home and in our air and in food products and in water. So this is the cat's out of the bag, and he's saying it's not quite out of the oven yet. What he means something different than what other people are gonna, like people who don't know about this stuff, they're gonna be like, oh, well, it's not being used yet, and it's in a very prototypal stage. But that's not what he means. So I just want to explain that.
With the first AAT concept. Obviously, if we can assess something, which is the idea of what most of these technologies will do, if we can then access it with regard to being able to utilize our technologies to then gain this particular site in the brain or elsewhere in the nervous system, then we can target it for something. And I'm going to tell you what these things are really used to be targeted for.
He's using the word targeting. I mean, he's using the word of targeting the brain, targeting specific regions of the brain. I mean, how much more up in your face do you need to get? Targeting certain areas of the brain to do certain functions, to change those or affect those or manipulate those in certain ways, to manipulate the brain. Remote neural manipulation.
The idea is if we can predict, then we may be able to intervene. And if we intervene, we do so towards prevention. Which is why the specter is of this fictional construct known as Minority Report. I'm not a real big Tom Cruise fan of the film Minority Report, because I think there were some things in there that were just like, oh, way out of... Now it's going to go on YouTube that I'm not a big Tom Cruise fan. I like Tom Cruise. I think he's a great guy and he's a good actor. But there were some things in this particular movie where, you know, oh, gosh, that's terrible, horrible, miserable. Yeah, right, that's called science fiction. One of the things that might happen is as you leave here tonight, you may be scratching your head and go, how do we stay off of that slippery slope? And that's okay if we do that.
And hold on, because we're already way past. If you see Minority Report, they go after people who are thinking about doing a crime, and they can figure out like, hey, that's not just them thinking about it. They are actually going to enact that crime. We're actually in a worse place where it's just innocent people, and they're raping and experimenting on our brains and our nervous systems to map them, give us complete torturous pain to do this, trauma-based behavioral control. We are way past the darkness showed in Minority Report, way past it. So it's a ridiculous statement that he makes there. It's very ridiculous.
So let's jump in real quickly. Once again, if I say anything that is jargon-esque and you don't know what I'm talking about, I apologize, and simply stop me. Just call out, raise a hand, jump up and down, hit me with food. That's fine. And the other thing is, seriously, if you don't understand.
Okay, James, stop. Stop murdering people, innocent Americans, to experiment on them with neurotechnology. Can I raise my hand and tell you, hey, Please speak about what's actually going on and stop this instead of participating in these mind mapping programs in the US and in England, where you torture people, where you torture their nervous systems and brains to find out information about the brain and the nervous system, and to, more than that, experiment with torture protocols and how to discredit people.
My New York accent, well, I can't help that, but I'll do the best I can. So we'll start off from the premise of this thing called neuroscience. I've spent the last 32 years of my life doing this. For those of you who had the opportunity to read a brief introduction of what it is that I do, I spend some of my time in a very strong laboratory circumstance doing basic and clinical translational neuroscience, mostly molecular neuroscience, that has a very strong bend towards what's called computational neuroscience. My actual bread and butter is that I'm a pain researcher, which is creepy enough as it is.
Wow, that is creepy. He's a pain researcher. Now, he is very, and this is, guys, this goes straight to those grounding straps that I'm talking about on the left leg. This guy studies how pain works. Now, pain, the signals of pain, have to go from the brain through the nervous system, then to the point of pain. So it should tell us a lot when a guy who is an expert in neuroscience and neuroweapons is really his education and his research is based in pain. It should tell us a lot. When we hear all these targeted individuals, and I'm sure all you guys who are here in the chat room, that you're experiencing horrific pain from directed energy weapons hitting your body and training your nervous system and your brain, a lot of pain is occurring in your body, in your head, in your spine, in you know, me for my hips and my torso, my groin and things like that. That's very telling when he says, hey, I have a specialty in learning about pain and how pain works. That can tell us a lot right there, guys.
And then the rest of my time I spend at a policy institute here in the district called the Center for Neurotechnology Studies at the Potomac Institute for Policy Studies, where we're looking at cutting-edge science and technology based upon our former pedigree. The Center for Neurotechnology Studies and the Potomac Institute get their pedigree from the fact that Potomac was at one point the Office of Technology Assessment that was decongressionalized in 1994. So the idea is really taking a deep dive into science and technology towards understanding the science and tech, to then being able to understand the ethical, legal, and social issues that arise from their use.
Wait. Let me go back, guys. He said it was decongressionalized in 1984.
District called the Center for Neurotechnology Studies at the Potomac Institute for Policy Studies, where we're looking at cutting-edge science and technology based upon our former pedigree. The Center for Neurotechnology Studies and the Potomac Institute get their pedigree from the fact that Potomac was at one point the Office of Technology Assessment that was decongressionalized in 1994.
So it was decongressionalized in 1994. What that means is that the Congress and the legislature were taken out of the picture, because these things start to be seen as viable weapons with black ops, viable weapons with national security, like you know, the CIA, the DIA, the Pentagon, the DOD, Army intelligence, naval intelligence, Air Force intelligence. So they take it away from the Congress, because this is going to be used by the military industrial complex, and they only want the Congress involved with giving them money. They don't want the Congress involved in knowing about the kind of advancements and how these things can actually be used to hurt people, to destroy their lives, to destroy their minds and their nervous systems.
So the idea is really taking a deep dive into science and technology towards understanding the science and tech, to then being able to understand the ethical, legal, and social issues that arise from their use, misuse, inappropriate use, and then that's what informs and perhaps may formulate policy. But I won't get into the meat and potatoes of the policy, but I will get into some of the meat and potatoes of the ethics, because that's really the idea where the rubber hits the road. So if we talk about...
Yeah, doesn't it? He's talking about ethics of something that he already knows is out of the bag and has been used to rip up people's nervous systems in their mind, to acquire data not just on the nervous system and the brain, because they do know a lot about that. By this time, they know so much but also to learn about torture protocols, how to discredit somebody, how to make somebody look more popular, those types of things. So it's ridiculous to me, and I'm trying to figure this guy out because he talks about ethics so much. So well, let's listen to him some more, and I'll talk about it in a second.
This science, neuroscience, first thing you need to know is it's a relatively new science. In fact, the term neuroscience wasn't even around when I went to school. The program that I went into was not a neuroscience program. It was a program in physiological psychology, because the first neuroscience programs didn't pop up until the middle 1970s, which should give you an idea about how old I am. And so what happened is, in a short amount of time, do the math, from about 1974, first real discrete titular program in neuroscience, to the present, now you see this booming field that brings together a whole host of different disciplines under the singular rubric of being able to study the way the brain and nervous system works in general, and by extension and focus, particularly the human brain and human nervous system works, to modulate a whole host of things, sensations, perceptions, and then at this level, cognitions, emotions, intentions, and behaviors. Obviously, contemporary neuroscience has made tremendous leaps, as I've tried to illustrate for you here by this panel of illustrations that suggest the idea of 17th and 18th century depictions of the brain taking a leap to the contemporary period of a static image, which is computationally enhanced, of the human brain, to the idea of then utilizing these salient characteristics of structure and increasingly of function to then be able to access the brain bidirectionally. And what I mean by this is not only to record from it, but also to then utilize similar technologies in reciprocity to stimulate or inhibit particular brain regions to then control the way certain brain regions and networks may function or not function, and ultimately in that way be able to direct, or in some way, in quotes, and this is a nasty word, control those functions.
Now, and he left out one picture, because when people who don't know about what they're doing right now, what the Pentagon's doing, what the DOD's doing, what the DIA is doing, what DARPA's doing, and what all these contractors are doing who are contracted by the Central Intelligence Agency, the Army Intelligence, Naval Intelligence, Air Force Intelligence, all these different contracts for different protocols, is that you don't need stuff connected directly to somebody's head. Now, we know that, but to other people, it seems to be this a bridge too far. It seems to be a bridge too far. So when he shows that picture, he left out another picture that actually just shows EMF around the head affecting certain regions of the brain. And we know that that's the point where they're at. And he says, remote neural monitoring, you're picking up signals from regions of the brain, right? You're seeing how the brain functions, and then he goes, and if you can do that, then you can actually manipulate parts of the brain. You can control parts of the brain. So he's basically saying mind control is being done and can be done. So let's listen to some more of him spinning this as something that will only be used for good.
The level that may range, in some cases, from the synaptic, the space connecting gap that exists between nerve cells, all the way to the psychosocial. So one of the things that I want to ground you to is how this field has gotten to this point, because this also talks about the potential for the way that we use neuroscience and its technologies. There's a particular lesson learning that goes on with much of science and the technologies that are used to get the science and then evoke the science as a task. And these are sometimes referred to as Gigerenzer heuristics. And what it really refers to is, first, we have a set of tools that are at our disposal. And we use those tools to study the natural world, in this case, the natural phenomenon of nervous systems in the brain. That allows us a particular level of theoretical acumen. We develop theories, how things work, what they're all about, what they mean. Once we get those theories, we then develop more sophisticated tools that we then apply to test those theories, supporting some, subordinating others, and yet negating others. And this then becomes this reciprocity of tools to theory and theory to tools. And these are the heuristics that built neuroscience into the science it is today. But more than this, contemporary neuroscience has cracked many of its silos of specificity. We don't see in neuroscience pure pharmacology, pure molecular biology, pure psychology any longer. These are increasingly being de-siloed to open up an opportunity space for collaboration in this new process which is known as integrative scientific convergence. What this allows for is a much larger opportunity space to tackle bigger and bigger problems, utilizing the tools, theories, and applications of this science called neuroscience that spans from the sub.
So let me give y'all an example of what he's talking about, like siloed research. So let's say there's some scientists working on how to send signals to the brain to actually impair like a part of the brain, to change an emotion, to amplify an emotion, or things like that. So that's siloed out from, let's say, the CIA's torture protocols, like the QBARC torture manual, right? So an example of what he's saying when he's saying de-siloed would be putting torture protocols together with remote neural manipulation, remote neural monitoring. So that's not all that he's talking about by de-siloing, but that's the type of de-siloing that's occurring. And we can see that as targeted individuals, especially when all these different methods are being used on us, not to just read signals from our brain with electromagnetic pulses, not to just manipulate our brain by putting in certain emotions, injecting visuals or anything like that, but then it's put in together with like psychic driving, which the CIA did with the QBARC manual, playing a song over and over again. So then they put the remote neural manipulation, remote neural monitoring together with psychic driving, with V2K saying the same things over and over again. So that de-siloing isn't only happening with scientific endeavors, it's happening with torture methodology. So they're combining and de-siloing scientific research because, you know, the military industrial complex is not just interested in reading somebody's EEG. They're not just interested in that. They're interested in affecting large groups, affecting people, affecting their families in either a negative or positive way. So what he's talking about de-siloing has actually gone to such a scale that certain torture protocols are then mixed with scientific protocols of how to research and study the brain and the nervous system. And that's what we get with the stuff that's happening to us as targeted individuals.
Molecular all the way up to the mass cultural. And in fact, this has been the trend and trajectory that neuroscience has assumed increasingly over the past 10 years as a consequence of this snowballing effect that we found. So one of the things that we need to understand is that whenever you see rapid and demonstrable progress like this, two things need to happen. First is we need to sort of sit up and take notice of what we can really do. Second is we need to sit up and take equal notice of what we really can't. And far too often what tends to happen is we run the risk of going in one of either of two directions. Over-exaggerative claims of what this stuff really can do and what it means, and we'll talk about that in some detail, or underestimations of what this stuff may really be able to do. And in either case, we run the risk of committing errors of either omission, commission, and all the ethical legal garbage that then gets tacked on board when we put these errors out into what I would call the social cultural marketplace and try to use these things. So what this then brings us down to is what I would call the mantra for the way I approach this. We have to be prudent with regard to the way we study these things and our uses in practice. And if you get no other take-home message.
So they failed, like prudent regard and use in practice. So they completely failed. He knows that they failed. They're testing this stuff on innocent people worldwide. They're researching and developing on innocent families all over the world. So he's saying they have to be very prudent how they use this stuff, and they've already failed. While he's saying this, he knows that they failed. So I'm not sure what he's talking about. I'm not sure where he's coming from, knowing that this stuff is already being used, knowing that it's already hurting so many people. I'm not sure if he sees that and he is sad about it, and he's trying to maybe pull that back in and give a warning about something that's already happening and pull it back. I guess if so, that could be good for us, even though he is involved in it. But that really confuses me, because he's saying they need to be prudent in the use of it, which they are not, which they are just researching and developing and using torture protocols and using this weaponry on so many people in a lottery system. And just, if you are in the wrong place at the wrong time, you know, you're going to get put in this program and you're going to be a guinea pig for it.
From this talk that I give you tonight, some of these things, as I say, are certainly provocative, many are contentious, some may actually scare you. The
Scares
idea
me.
here is that this mantra of prudence creates a set of marching orders that will dictate the pace, progress, trajectory, slope, and valence of neuro.
And I want to say something kind of catty here. It's a little bit catty. Whenever he does a seminar or a speech or an article or anything like that, he makes sure that to say none of his views, the DoD, the Pentagon, in that military-industrial complex structure does not agree with his views necessarily. And that's obvious, because when the military-industrial complex sees something this powerful and they're like, wow, this can control people, it can kill them, like it could stop their heart, it can do all this stuff, they're not thinking prudence, they're thinking power. And whenever somebody's thinking about power, they aren't thinking about being prudent and well thought out. They're thinking about how much power can they gain from this. And so this guy is saying that there needs to be prudence and ethics, but then on all of his seminars and everything like that, he says, make sure to know that my views are not necessarily the views of the people who are actually using it. The people who are in control of deciding how this stuff's going to be used don't share his values, you know? So yeah, I hope that maybe they will start to, but the military-industrial complex is never very prudent, and it's never very empathetic, and it's never never really tries to think of, hey, we've got to be very prudent in this and not murder a bunch of innocent people. It really could care less.
Scientific and neurotechnological acumen and progress for the next several years, and at very, very least it should. Oh, why? Well, one of the things we're able to see is that in a very short amount of time, in a very short amount of time, these tools of neuroscience have made ardent strides in capability, where there's been an increase in sophistication because of the convergence of a variety of techniques and iterative improvement in the way these particular tools are able to do the job they do, based once again upon an increased understanding of the theoretical basis of the way brains work, and also an improvement in the actual tools we have at our disposal, not the least of which increased computational capability, an increased set of variables that we now are understanding about various molecular targets, and better insight to get things down to a much more finely grained level of perception and analysis. One of the areas that's been probably most important is being able to assess what the structure and function of nervous systems and brains are doing. And of course, I think one of the fields that you probably see overwhelmingly, even in your daily lives, is the fact that we've seen a number of different forms of imaging that have gone from very, very static images of the brain to much more dynamic representations of putative or hypothetical functions of the brain that try to elucidate and demonstrate what different regions of the brain may be involved in, the extent of their particular involvement, types of dysfunction that may be reflected in patterns of blood flow or metabolic use of a variety of different chemicals, some injected, some endogenous. And so what we see is that this area of neuroimaging has gained particular sophistication, but it too has limits. There are some real problems that go along with neuroimaging, and for those of you who are aware of it or may use it in your practice, you recognize that there's a lot of stuff it can do, and there's a lot of stuff it can't. and being able to parse the difference between those two speaks volumes when we're dealing with making particular predictions, not about whether or not there's something existing in the head in terms of a structure, but what particular functions may mean to the way we then appreciate them and apprehend them in social contexts that deal with normality, abnormality, rightness, wrongness, goodness, and badness. So it opens up a proverbial Pandora's box in many ways that we'll discuss in some more detail. But this represents sort of the contemporary palette of the major forms of neuroimaging that we have at our disposal to do this kind of stuff. Now, many of these are also usable in the clinical realm, and in fact, the translation from clinical realm to non-clinical realm, to what we would call social diagnostics, is fairly easy these days. Many reasons because of that is that you find a good interface between clinical medicine, we call applied science, in those areas such as social neuroscience and its applications in the socio-cultural, even political realm. Well, this is sort of an increasing palette that has gone from relative simplicity, computerized tomography, which is really built upon X-ray principles, a very static image that can be enhanced, for example, through the use of particular types of contrast, to the injection of particular types of radioisotopes that then create much more of a viable signal with regard to what areas of the brain are more metabolically active, particularly by getting a metabolic signal that's derived from glucose and various forms of glucose. We can then increase that a bit, and I'll explain these to you in a little bit more detail, but not to the point where you just fall asleep and you're down in the weeds snoozing away. And the next more sophisticated level is something we call SPECT, which is single photon emission computerized tomography. It too is a form of X-ray derived tomography, an X-ray type of image, but what it does is it uses a particular type of decay of a molecule that then enhances the signal both with regard to its temporal characteristics and spatial characteristics, gives us a little more fine granularity. We have magnetic resonance imaging that gives us a nice and very beautiful anatomical picture of structure, but structure does very little to tell us what's going on with regard to function. So what we've then done is we pumped up the volume a little bit. We then have this beast called functional magnetic resonance imaging, which has become so popular that has a number of limits that I'll discuss that have been delimited by the use of what we call co-registered technologies, inclusive of this thing called diffuse tensor imaging, which then measures water molecules and their particular spin in response to a magnetic pulse that help to give us beautiful images of white matter tract connections in the brain. Still some limitations. And if we then couple these types of pure images to electrical activity, at least at the superficial levels of the brain, we get a nice co-registered image that shows structure, function, and physiological characteristics that bridge some of the gaps between spatial and temporal resolution and non-resolution. So the way we're really seeing this these days is that these things are not necessarily used in isolation, but are used in sort of a pick 'em choose 'em, pretty much the same way you have here on your menu. I don't see everybody just piling up the plate with one thing. We create a complete meal that has
a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of MRI, a little bit of functional MRI, a little bit of DTI. Now, I just want to say real quickly, I had a DTI, which I'm trying to get in touch with the University of Pennsylvania. The person that was doing the section of them, it's like the Penn neuroscience. I can't remember the exact name, but I'm trying to get in touch with them so I can send my DTI to them, or I can maybe go out there and get testing, hopefully. I don't know how that's going to work. But, I really have questions about my DTI because the DTI, he's saying that it looks at the spin of the water molecules and connections between neurons, the white matter tracks. And they said, my neurologist said that there was nothing abnormal about that after years and years of my brain being, shot with directed energy weapons. So, I think there was medical COINTELPRO or just very big ignorance on their part. But I just wanted to mention that I'm kind of, I'm focusing on University of Pennsylvania to help me to maybe read those DTIs and actually see what they, we're probably seeing in those embassy workers. The DTI is very important, but what he's saying is they can take a DTI and then magnetic encephalography kind of get what they want out of every form of the testing to create an even bigger image and a more detailed image of the brain. So we think about all these tests that were in the past that they've perfected, and their understanding of the nervous system in the brain, understanding of what can look at the most detailed part, and then we get kind of a picture of how they came out with doing this remotely. By combining many of these methods in our remote neural monitoring and remote neural manipulation, they have increased their ability to get in there and target a more detailed part of the brain by all these past testings, all these past tests where they've learned so much about what shows the best part of the brain, what shows exactly what we need to see about this function of the brain, or this function of the brain that is connected to this kind of behavior, what neurons affect, these types of feelings and things like that.
An appetizing effect and satisfies what you need and what you want by combining the elements that you're able to get from the proverbial menu of things that are currently available to you, and doing so in such a way as to satisfy the needs. A little bit of ketchup helps, a little bit of chicken helps, a little bit of French fries help. We put them all together and bada bing, bada boom, where you get the complete meal of neurotechnology that allows imaging access to the brain and at least some of its functions. But that's not enough. What if you came back to me and you said, but tell me about the recipes. I want to know what they're serving even before I get to the restaurant. I want to know what's going into that stuff and what all these ingredients, when put together, will become. I said to you, perhaps no problem. Because what we can then do is we can take this particular form of neurotechnology that harnesses its power and impetus from the Human Genome Project and the history of molecular biology and genetic techniques, and we can do some nifty stuff here, taking a look at genes of both populations and individuals, as well as the proteins that they express. So if we see these things, and this is a real nice, pretty picture, incidentally, the brain you're looking at is mine, and we'll talk about it in a moment. This way I don't have to give anybody else credit. This is my head. I'm not going to tell you what I'm thinking about until later.
It's probably thinking about experimenting on innocent people and targeting them to get more research done and more data done. And it does, this is kind of a little crack at him, I guess, because if he is involved in this, I think he's fair game for targeted individuals. But you notice in that picture of his brain, he's got a lot of activity going on just in the back. And people that are sociopaths or psychopaths, they have most of the activity going on in the back of the brain and not much activity going on in the front. So I'm not sure, but it looks like a lot of the back part of his brain is lit up. That's just a little crack at him.
So what do we find? What is the level of technological enablement? Well, it's this. It's neuroimaging, neurogenomics, and genetics. Genomics deals with populations. Genetics deal with individuals. And the idea that we can put all these things really niftily together, harnessing the power of cyber technology, of computational technology, through the use of ever-increasing data banking that increasingly relies upon cloud computation to pull down tremendous amounts of information in real time. And I'll show you why that's important.
In real time, and he'll show you why it's important.
Right now,
in real time.
And much of the capacity allows us to do these three things. It allows us to make some nice correlations between structures and functions. Not perfect, but pretty good. It allows us to take in variations of what these structure-function relationships look like within populations and individual predispositions. So we see, this is what a norm looks like, this is an abnorm, you're fitting somewhere in between these two, sort of like the way we look at an x-ray. I know what a femur looks like, yours has a big crack in the middle, not good. So we see something like this and we go, not good. It's great when you see a stick in somebody's head or the tumor the size of a softball. It's a lot harder to do. We're trying to figure out network patterns in the way things function, and it gets really tricky when we go to this level and we say, what about individual trajectories? What people are gonna do based upon their current level of structure and function, and what their genes and proteins tell us they might do. So you can see that what I'm doing is digging a very much deeper hole for neuroscience and neurotechnology to have to try to dig itself out of by means of the explanatory power of what these things do.
So that's a really important thing there when he talks about trajectory, because as targeted individuals, you know, a lot of us talk about like, well, you know, I was thinking about going to, you know, Walmart, and then I saw a lot of gang stalkers there. It's like they kind of predicted where I was going. Now they can see a visual, like if you're thinking about Walmart too, but they can do what he's saying. They can take your previous behaviors, and this kind of goes into hyper game theory. They can take previous behaviors, previous dispositions, even on a genetic level, to kind of predict what you're going to do. Maybe even if it's kind of, random, they can even maybe predict that, because they've gotten down to a neural level with this neural trajectory and neural genetic genetic predisposition to certain things. So we think about all these things that they can do, all the stuff that our attackers can kind of predict or get a really good estimation of what your actions are going to be, to down to like, you know, 90% or 95%. They're probably going to do this because of past activities, because of dispositions they have, because of genetic predispositions, because of neural predispositions. So all these sciences that he was talking about, all those tests have given them a very detailed outlook on how to then predict trajectory in behavior. So I just want to throw that in there.
So let me just sort of give you a little explanation of what these things do, what they can do, what they can't do. First of all, they're really pretty pictures. And you've seen tons of these, I'm sure. You can't swing a wet rope over your head these days without seeing a picture that looks something like this, or the other forms of images that I'm about to show you. And I guarantee this to you. And this is an experiment you can try at home. And since this is on YouTube, you and the YouTube audience can in fact do this in the privacy of your own home. Simply Google brain image and see what comes up. Gazillions of these pretty pictures, and you can go to a magazine in a magazine stand.
Well, I mean, we can do better, right? The targeted individuals that are watching this video, I mean, we are being experimented on by neurotechnology and neuroweapons. So, you know, we get more of a front seat, right? And I'm being sarcastic on that because I'm not happy about it. But I wish maybe he would give us a message. Like, hey, for all the people that we're researching and developing this technology on, this is what you can use to maybe protect yourself and save your life. That would be useful information. Not looking up brain imaging. I'm sorry, that was just a little snipe at him. I'm sniping at him a lot tonight because, you know, I hate this stuff that's going on, and I'm a little bit angry about it all. To say it in the, I guess, the nicest way that I can. But let's let him continue talking.
You can take a look in the newspaper, and I guarantee you, if you spend more than 20 minutes in a magazine stand, not even looking at a science magazine, you'll find one of these. Having to do with, this is your brain on drugs, this is your brain on sex, this is your brain when you buy a Ford, this is your brain when you smoke. You've seen these things. Big note to you. Brains don't really look like that when you open them up. All right? Am I right? Okay. See? I'm going to use you as my straight man in the back of the room. I'm going to bounce every neurological question off of you. Been there, done this, seen this, they don't look like this. Moreover, your nerve cells are not color-coded for easy ID. That's a mistake. This is as much art as it is science and skill, because there is a very, very specific computational translation program that allows for, it's called a colorimetric translation of individual pixelations of different densities of intensity of signal that are then codified like this. How many of you remember that old TV series, I mean the first one, called The Outer Limits? Remember that?
Yeah, I do.
Right? So, I mean, it's usually a science crowd. You can always tell the science geeks are. It's like, me, I remember, I've got all the reruns on DVD. Yeah, I love that show. Remember in the beginning, the guy would say, there's nothing wrong with your television set. We control the horizontal. Remember that? We control the statistical parametric program that defines what is signal and what is noise. We do it. We do it. We set the threshold as to what we define as a viable statistical signal and what is not. we set the different limits upon which we then figure what is signal and what is noise, so as to be able to get a statistically valid representation of what may be going on in these different brain areas. Well, this is positron emission tomography. It's a nice jump up from computerized tomography, and what it does is really provide a spatial, albeit crude, representation of metabolic activity in the brain. Characteristically, those areas that are more active pop up as red, and this is what's called a standard iconography, a semiotic iconography. We see red as hot. Those are hot brain areas. And what this really represents is the fact that there are, in fact, metabolic changes that are occurring, characteristically in response to the conversion of a primary molecule, which is usually some derivative of glucose. Let me get the next one. Okay. We can increase this a little bit, and we can then ramp up this signal through this thing called SPECT, which is single photon emission computerized tomography, which once again is based upon a tomographic image.
I kind of want to stop it right here, guys, and just say, you know how our attackers, like, they seem to know what really bothers us? Like, and that's not only done by outward signs, like if you yell at your V2K, or, you know, you're visibly physically upset. Certain areas of the brain are going to light up when you're happy, and certain areas of the brain are going to light up when you're in distress, when you're very angry, when you're very hurt, when you're very sad. So I'd like to just propose, and I think we all know this is common sense, that our attackers are looking at certain areas of our brain light up by remote means, by remote electrical pulse means. They're getting imagery of the brain and how it's functioning, and they can see if when they do something, they can see how it upsets us to a region of the brain level, you know, reacting to what they're doing. So the only real way to get them to actually stop doing some kind of protocol on you is to really not let it bother you. Not only show that it doesn't bother you in a physical way, but to really practice and discipline yourself to where that protocol really does no longer bother you. And then they won't do it so much. Now that's a little bit harder, easier said than done, but I just kind of wanted to throw that out there, that I think we realize that they are, with electromagnetic pulses, seeing what parts of our brain are lighting up. You know, whenever they're doing something, some kind of tactic, or whenever we're doing something that's independent of them, and then they can, you know, use that to say, hey, what's going to mess with this person?
Is then mapped to what's known as a standard set of coordinates. These are sometimes referred to as Talairach coordinates, if you hear these noted in the literature. And what we're then able to do is we're able to get differential signals based once again upon metabolic activity as well as cerebral blood flow, because now what we're doing is we're putting in particular types of tracers that identify what brain areas are getting more blood flow at a particular time, and what also are the particular metabolic characteristics. Now, we could dig down the rabbit hole a little bit, and this really does represent a somewhat more sophisticated version of what you saw before, which was PET scanning, but then builds upon CT scanning, and it's pretty good. But it is weak on two levels. It's temporally a little bit weak. The signal intensity takes a little bit while to come up, and you can still see that these images are pretty crude. These are sort of gross brain areas. That would be like me trying to figure out what the person in the back of the room is having, and the best I can sort of do is I can say, well, at the barbecue pit, I know somebody's having a burger. Duh. Yeah. But getting closer, certainly getting closer. And then you have this. And this is the thing that lights everybody up. And really, when functional magnetic imaging came out, it was a big deal. I mean, it was the bomb. Why? Because what it does is it passes a magnetic current in that resonates, changes a particular spin of molecules with response to whether blood is laden in hemoglobin or has a non-oxygenated form of hemoglobin that represents a conversion between blood going to a site and then blood being used at a site. It is represented as showing functional activity in different brain regions as a consequence of what the brain and the person whose brain this is doing. Now, this is one area that has been tremendously exploited. There has been a 400-fold increase over the past 2 to 3 years in numbers of studies that have utilized some form of functional magnetic resonance imaging, either alone or together, and there has been a multi-thousand-fold increase in this type of neuroimaging, again, either alone or together, since neuroimaging was first, in fact, launched as a viable discipline. If we look at the publication slope over the past 10 to 15 years, it's practically vertical. It's practically a straight line going all the way up, with an increasing number of studies that are utilizing this. And in fact, I also serve as an editor for a medical journal. And one of the things that came up in our editors conference was, if in fact people are doing these types of central nervous system studies, if they're not doing something where they're literally sticking something in the head and they're trying to determine that there's brain regional activity, without these types of pictures, that's just not going to get published. Moreover, the number of journals that are dedicated to neuroimaging has increased 300-fold. Now, that's a lot. That's really a lot. And if we take a look at this image, this really does look like a very nice image. Why? Because we see that there's a fair amount of spatial representation and tightness. These are brain areas that are really, really hot. This is a brain where the nose is up here, and the back of the head is down here. This is somebody, I'm not going to say who, me, facing this way. And obviously, this is the back of the brain, and this is an area we know, based upon anatomical and physiological studies, to be involved with something visual. So one could look at this and go, well, there's a visual task going on here. There's also an area here, which is in the left temporal junction, which has to do with some form of recognition and identification. And
I do want to stop it here for just a second. You know how a lot of targeted individuals with remote neural monitoring, a lot of target individuals, they say, you know, my attackers can see through my eyes, or some people think that they actually have cameras in their eyes or things like that. Now, what he's showing, that image that he's showing, him in the picture, when they did that image to his brain, he was looking at something. So that's your occipital lobe. The occipital lobe is lighting up. Now, when you're being remote neural monitored, that's they are looking through your eyes in quotation marks, because really what they're doing is they're getting a signal from your occipital lobe. Your occipital lobe is where what you're seeing is translated into the occipital lobe and then goes to the visual cortex as short-term or long-term memory. Short-term memory first and then turns into long-term memory. So I just wanted to kind of throw that in there. You see that back part is the occipital lobe. Now that's, you know, when you're looking at something, your attackers can basically see what you're seeing because they're getting a signal from that region of the brain.
Another area here on this other side, which is sort of the non-dominant side in most people, but not me because I'm left-handed, which is why it's probably lit up like a candle, that has to do with emotionality, what we call prosodic emotion. What I'm actually looking at here is hard to say. It's either a glass of bourbon or my wife. I don't really remember. The response is the same and they merge depending on more of have either. But what we find is that there's an increasing amount of inference that says we might be able to take a look at this type of an image and do three things. Number one, relate these back to studies of similar brain images to try to determine what this brain image is actually telling us that this person may be doing. Then relating that back to whether or not this represents some norm or an abnorm. And perhaps the most exciting one that has been ongoing since about 1994 has been a project that has been utilizing increased databasing to be able to assemble these types of images and correlate them back to what the individual was either looking at, hearing, touching, or in some cases, this is a stretch, experiencing and thinking, and then trying to match the image through data analysis, which is called a correlational match and fit, to these types of thoughts.
So that's a very important thing he said there. They're trying to get a normative base for, and I can't show y'all where I'm pointing, but the back part of the brain that's lighting up in the occipital lobe, they can actually now, I mean, we know, and probably during the time that he was giving this seminar, by what's lighting up in your brain, they probably have an algorithm to say what you're looking at, exactly what you're looking at. So they may not all, like our attackers may not always be getting clear visuals through remote neural monitoring, but they've done such extensive study on how people's brains light up when they're seeing specific images, then put it on a normative scale so that then probably the systems that our attackers work with, when our brain is lighting up in a certain way, their system, their stream back, because it's a bidirectional stream of energy, the stream back can tell them basically what you might be looking at. So that's a super, super important point. So they can actually get a visual, but if they can't get a clear visual, they can make not a pretty good guess. They can pretty much estimate to a pretty high percentage what it is you're looking at, because they've done so many normative studies on how the brain lights up when normal people look at specific things. And then they've made correlations with those things. Like, so they show everybody like I'm trying to think of a good example. They show everybody like maybe a woman in a bathing suit or something like that. And all men have a normative comparison of this part of the brain lights up. So then they say, okay, well, this is how the structure is going to look that lights up when a normative man is looking at a woman in a bikini or something like that. They can do that for women. What parts of the brain light up when a woman looks at another woman in a bikini, or a man in a bathing suit, or so forth and so on. But they've done such extensive testing on this that they have a long list, probably everything that somebody could look at or think to look at, and a comparison of which areas of your brain light up when you do look at that thing. So we've got to remember that as targeted individuals, because my V2K likes to comment on stuff that I'm looking at or stuff that I'm doing. They already have a lot of the data on the normative functions of the brain when somebody is doing or looking at a certain thing. So I just want to throw that out there.
They're going one step further, and they're actually doing what's called a spectral analysis of what's showing up here, particularly in the visual cortex, to try to recreate the image with fidelity of what this individual is looking at.
There you
They're
go.
making some good progress.
There you go. There you go. You heard what he said. So that's remote neural monitoring. That's how they can get a visual from our brain, because they've done all those studies on what a person's looking at, what areas of the brain are lit up. They get a signal from that area of the brain to recreate the visual, of what you're looking at. And that's how your attackers can, in quotation marks, see through your eyes.
Now, the limitation, I shall tell you, is that it's pretty easy to do in the visual cortex, because the way this area of the brain is actually oriented and functions. It's a lot more difficult to do when we move out of what we call sensory representation, pure sensory representation, like vision, hearing, perhaps some of the smell areas, and we go into things like, now, what was this person feeling? Although there are plenty of people who will try to do that. We see certain brain areas like these areas lighting up, and we recognize as these areas that are involved, what we call limbic regions, are representative for arousal. Thank God these brain areas lit up when I was thinking about my wife, otherwise I wouldn't be married now. So, yes, ma'am?
This is a visual. They're taking a picture of a visual something.
Yes, ma'am.
If you are thinking the same thing without the visual.
This is a great question. The question she asked is a question of representation without identification. So in other words, if in fact I'm looking at this particular thing, please don't let me break it. Okay. If I'm looking at this particular thing, is the brain image that is produced when I look at this the same as the brain image when I think about this? And the answer is sometimes. There seems to be a crude representation when the individual thinks about it, but not just in the same place. Because when we think about something, we actually have to conjure up slightly different networks of the brain that then may pull in particular representations, but that's actually more of a memory phenomenon. So what we see is a lot more of these memory-related areas, or sometimes referred to as the parahippocampal areas, that are then, I hate this word and I'm going to use it anyway, that then light up. Nothing lights up. There really aren't lights in your head, but it seems to get much more active. Yes, sir.
That's a 2D image?
I'm sorry?
That's a 2D image?
Yes, this is a 2D image. This can actually be tessellated into a three-dimensional image that looks very, very nice, and that's called a tessellated image. When we tessellate the image, we can then map this onto a three-dimensional representation. I'm sure you've seen these. They're really lovely. I mean, they make wonderful prints to frame around the house. But the other thing you can do with those is, all kidding aside, is they actually can create a very, very nice hierarchical depiction of the way particular brain regions are activated in time and in sequence. The problem we have with this is that this particular technology doesn't have a lot of temporal fidelity. It doesn't happen real fast. Brains and nerves work a lot faster than this. Why? What is this measuring? This is measuring blood flow and blood use. There's the old adage that I'm sure my neurology and psych friends are familiar with, is that functional MRI is a measure of vein, not brain. And in many ways, that may be true. So one of the things we find is that this is time limited. You're sort of getting an after effect. And there is a large literature to suggest that a lot of this stuff may be artifactual, and we have to pump up the volume to be able to pull meaning out of the statistical signal. This, I think, is really, this is really suitable for framing. I really like these things. And for what I do for a living, this is our bread and butter. This is called diffusion tensor imaging. And when you pair these two things together, what I get is not only a nice image of static areas that are active with regard to blood utilization and use, but also the networks to which they are connected. And I can get a pretty nice temporal signal as well when I then pair this to a physiological measure. What this then does, what diffusion tensor imaging does, is also use a magnetic signal, but it reveals white matter tracts and whole networks rather than just toe bone, foot bone kind of thing. This is sort of like saying, well, we see some activity in Arlington, and there's a little bit going on in Old Town, and Fairfax looks kind of happy too. This comes along and tells you, and by the way, they are connected. So this really shows you sort of the metro system of the brain, and may also provide you with sort of a real-time representation of the way these things might light up when they are neurotechnology. Alone, they don't. Alone, this is a static image. But if you then couple these things to serial images over time with neurophysiology, you may be able to determine this in a little bit more what we call viable temporal sequence. But this is nice because it shows that there are real connections that are actually engaged between these different brain areas, and it also shows the relative strength of these connections. So this is nice to be able to sort of give me a roadmap of what's going on in the brain. Where it gets really cool is when I can then couple these images, these snapshot images,
look at this,
to functional activity of the underlying electrochemical networks of the brain. And that's what electroencephalographic measures do. Now, EEG has been around for a fairly long time. These measures tend to be pretty crude. At least they
look at how they're doing it. So there's an electrical current and a magnetic field, and then they're doing intracellular current, so a dendrite. So with us, we've got to understand, and this goes to kind of, it does go to the grounding that I've been doing with my left leg. They have to introduce a signal that is part electric and part magnetic. So electromagnetic, obviously, when we're getting remote neural manipulation or remote neural monitoring, we have basically a magnetic field around our head. Like they're basically producing a magnetic field around our head. Then they've got like a bidirectional stream of energy that has a current to it. It has a current to it, and that's basically an active form of encephalography. Let's listen to him talk about it, but you can put together this picture of what they're showing, and I hope that it can, I don't know how many people who have no idea about this stuff, but when targeted individuals talk about being hit with electromagnetic frequencies, this is how they read the brain. This is how they send signals to the brain. Our body, the functions of our organs, our brain, they're all electromagnetic. So, let's listen to him talk about this.
They used to be. Now, they've increased quite a bit in their sophistication, primarily through three means. Number one, They use a high number of actual sensors that have a much greater fidelity and specificity. Number two, be able to translate that program into a high computational program. And number three, they will also couple this to a magnetic field to be able to then create something called magnetoencephalography, which creates a much more accurate representation of the whole network activity of these clumps of cells that may be firing both in unison and out of sync. So what we're able to do is when we pair this with these imaging types, we get a pretty nice picture of structure and structural related
Okay, wait. I'm sorry, I was mistaken on that. There's intracellular current, the dendrites, that's not something they're actually attaching to the head. Now, this is actually a picture of them not attaching anything to somebody's head, which is more, it's better proof that what they're doing to us is remotely reading brain signals and introducing electromagnetic signals to manipulate the brain and to introduce pain into our body and things like that. So he's talking about right here something that the medical industry uses to actually see what's going on actively in the brain. So it's very disheartening, and it's very ingenuous that doctors do not believe us. It's their fear, or they're involved or whatever, because they do this. Like, doctors use this. They use magnetic fields and electric current where nothing is connected to somebody's head to do the type of reading and remote neural monitoring that's being done to us remotely. So the fact that people can't believe that, like, you know, there are magnetrons and basically transmitters on cell towers, satellites to cell towers, and that can be remotely sent to somebody's head and nervous system to actually do some of these things that they do in the medical field. Something they've been doing in the medical field for years and years and years is disingenuous, and people should be able to understand what we're talking about, especially doctors.
So the big limitation here with both quantitative encephalography and magnetoencephalography is that it's pretty much limited to most of the superficial layers of the brain. It really is a measure of what the top layers are doing, although increasingly what we're trying to do is to drill down a little bit, if you will, and I mean that literally, through the use of indwelling brain implants and or some of the use of our nanotechnology sensor capability.
Listen to what he just said there. So when people are talking, targeted individuals are talking about nanotechnology in chemtrails, or nanotechnology in certain toxins put into our environment, nanotechnology put into food, into water, that's a way that they can read deeper functions of the brain, not in just the first layer. So they need that nanotechnology, or they need to put like an implant directly in the brain, which I don't know how many of us have that. I don't think I have an implant directly in my brain, but I know that I've got nanotechnology that's attaching itself to neurons, attaching itself to certain parts of my brain. Now that will be able to let that electromagnetic field, that remote electromagnetic field, read deeper into the brain, deeper functions of the brain, and send signals to manipulate those deeper functions of the brain.
To be able to then lower the specificity of the signal so that now we're getting a much higher registry in deeper brain levels. That's still a fairly new technology. But one of the things we can do,
it's a new technology in the medical.
We can also use a computation.
It's a new technology in the medical field, like but not within the military-industrial complex. The military-industrial complex is like 50 to 100 years ahead of technology that's in the medical field. So he's saying, hey, in the medical field and in medical circles, this is pretty new. But the military-industrial complex has already taken it, is already using it and weaponizing this research and development. So, I mean, you know, I guess in a sense, he's not lying when he says it's a new technology in the medical field, but he's not saying that. He's just saying in general, it's a new technology. So I consider that to be a lie.
Program to map this onto a 3D representation. Again, this is called a tessellated image of different patterns of EEG activity that we then co-map with either MRI, fMRI, or in some cases a combination of MRI and diffuser tension imaging. And that gives you this very, very nice structural, functional, what's called analog representation that provides different types of activities with a high level of functional specificity and temporal specificity through EEG, a nice tight time signal that compensates in some ways for the lower signal we get with this stuff, and this stuff. So take-home message. What do I do with neuroimaging? I compensate for its flaws, and I attempt to delimit its insufficiencies by coupling more than one of these neuroimaging potentials together, or techniques together. And I utilize a program of co-registration that combines more than one of these together with various forms of physiologic imaging, such as this, that can be depicted this way. And I get a...
Hey guys, I gotta go get my electronic cigarette real quick. I will be back in like 2 seconds. I just want to stop it because I want to hear. I haven't watched this in a while, so I kind of wanted to watch it with you guys. I want to make sure I catch everything that he's saying. So I'll be right back, just 2 seconds. All right, I'm back. I'm actually gonna eat some of my calcium chews too while this is going on. Calcium with vitamin D. It helps calcium absorption and metabolism. All right, now I'll get it started again. I just don't want to miss anything if he says something really important. I know this is a lot of, you know, he's not saying as much as I thought he would say about that he did in the like he did in the other seminar where he's talking about actually neuroweaponry. He's mostly talking about the old forms of actually, you know, MRI imaging and stuff like that. But it has a lot to do, the history of reading the brain and brain function has a lot to do with these neuroweapons that they're now using on a functional basis remotely. So I do want to go through this information, and I think towards the end he gets into some of the more advanced technology that they're using. So let's let him continue.
Pretty nice set of images that can show structure and what structures are engaged in particular activities, behaviors, and cognitions, and patterns of electrophysiological activity. It's pretty nice. On a diagnostic level, as those of you who are clinicians will know, these each and all have their place, both alone and in combination, and we're making some pretty good headway diagnostically. Increasingly, functional MRI is being used as a pre-surgical technique. It's being used as a post-surgical technique to take a look at how the real estate in the brain has been affected by surgery, also by trauma, insult, congenital issues. There's a whole bunch of things we can do with this. But increasingly what's also occurring is that these types of technologies are being used in ways that say, what is the norm for the way particular groups of people will process certain types of cognitions, emotions, and respond behaviorally to a variety of circumstances and situations. Now, you can see that there's a bit of a weakness there, because what it doesn't do is it doesn't give you predictive value in all cases. So we then move into this beast. This is where we now move into the area of saying not only what's happening right now.
Beast is the right word.
But can we look into the proverbial crystal ball of the human genome and your individual genetic complement to determine not only what is, but what will be? And if we couple this with patterns of imaging, could we get a pretty good correlation over a period of time to suggest, yeah, this is what your genes have laid down as a blueprint. And then the blueprint that has been built upon through various sets of environmental experiences, insult, trauma, patterns of behavior, is this pattern of physiological and structural activity that we're then able to correlate an image through some of these neuroimaging techniques that I've just shown you. So what the neurogenetic techniques allow us to do is to understand more about the potential for different brain structures and brain functions to develop, and then correlate what is actually happening in brain imaging over time with the way this potential may have laid down predispositions for certain types of brain function, certain types of cognitions, emotions, and behavior.
And I want to throw something out here, guys. So, you know, gang stalking runs parallel to our neuroweapon attacks, directed energy weapon system attacks on us, the torture, the sleep deprivation, the things like that. Now, what he's saying, he said insult trauma. So what they're doing is that they can't, that predictive, that neurotechnology predicting actions is limited. But then when you put in something like traumatizing a person 24 hours a day, harassing them 24 hours a day, that predictive, that being able to predict somebody's brain is going to become easier, because you're putting in a variable on all targeted individuals, constant harassment, constant isolation, constant insulting them while they're being hurt. So, like, say they were doing this to us, say they were doing, you know, directed energy weapon torture and remote neural manipulation, pulsing pain in the body, things like that, but they were not putting in that variable of 24-hour a day harassment. Then the variables of what we're going to do would be, it would be less predictable. Our behavior would be less predictable. So with them putting in 24-hour a day trauma and harassment and basically making us feel, you know, hyper vigilant and not trusting people, it smooths out, it doesn't smooth out anything, actually. It makes our behavior more predictable. Even though everybody has very different personalities and everything, we react primally instinctive to some of the stuff that's going on, the harassment that's going on. There's certain things that humans do when they feel like they're being attacked. There's certain things that humans do when they don't think that they can trust people. And there, that whittles down a lot of these variables that they cannot control. So it's easier to make us guinea pigs, and well, and it also has many more angles, you know, discredit us, you know, get money for DHS fusion centers and InfraGard and in the surveillance state and NSA, like getting money for them and discrediting us. But it also plays a very important factor in trauma-based behavioral control, or trauma-based behavioral manipulation, because it's putting a variable in there that's pretty similar for all of us. And therefore, their predictive abilities on our behaviors becomes easier for them. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Behaviors and the potential for norms and abnorms, but not just physiological. We define what kind of norms and abnorms, as I'll show you in a moment. But what does this do? What do the genomics and genetics actually try to do? Well, I won't bore you by reading the slide, but very briefly what it does is it shows genetic sequences. We all have a particular genetic code. Now, there's much of the human genome and our individual genetics that are identical between individuals. But the devils and sort of deities lie in the details of our differences. And one of the things we can find is there are certain genes that are activated and others that are not. And these may then predict, and in some cases, have an influence on defining what brain proteins are then activated for structures, and ultimately may help to then define functions, not only in a sort of static way, but the way the brain and nervous system may respond to a variety of different types of stimuli. So what it does is it attempts to target, remember, AAS?
And that's an important thing. Like he's saying, how we respond to things, you you know, can be kind of seen by our genetic makeup, but it also how we respond to things. What if that stimulus is the same for all of us? Like that stimulus of gang stalking, of you know, people, you know, walking out at the same time as you, you know, so it makes you hyper vigilant. You know, street theater, you know, vehicular stalking, things like that. You know, vehicular stalking by authority figures. Now, if they make those stimuli across the board pretty similar, then they kind of narrow us down. They narrow our actions that we can take down. Now, and that doesn't, that's not, I'm not saying that that's an end all be all. Our actions, we can, you know, find ways to fight back on the gang stalking and ignore it, and you know, and adapt and become better at dealing with all this stuff. But I'm saying that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to narrow down stimuluses in our life so that then they can be like, okay, well, then they don't have to, they don't have as many I'm trying to think of the word, as many variables of what our actions are going to be. You see what I'm saying? So what he's talking about here is he's talking about where this research and development came from, of them trying to control a person's behavior, of them trying to them trying to control a behavior or manipulate somebody's mind. What kind of thought processes they went through to say, okay, well, people respond to stimuluses in a certain way. So what if we are targeting some group of people's brains, which would be targeted individuals, and I think there's millions of us all over the world, at least millions of us all over the world, and then there are some people who don't know they're being targeted and are targeted. We give them the same stimuluses, the same negative stimuluses over and over every day. Then what they want is they want our kind of action set, I guess you could call it that, to be narrowed down. Now, we're not going to let them do that. I mean, we're not going to let them succeed, but that's basically what they want to do with that. So I just want to I want to throw that out there.
Assess, access, target certain genetic sequences that may participate in disease states, conditions, or just simple behavioral and cognitive states. The idea is what makes you you? Now, before you go, come on, that is pure science fiction. Let me just stop here for a moment. Have any of you ever heard of a company called 23andMe? You have. Some of you have. We know all the swingers in the room. So have you heard about spit parties? You know what a spit party is? Yeah, see? Okay, what a spit party is that there's a company, one of them is called 23andMe, there are now several more, there's at least a dozen and a half of these companies, and what you do is you basically spit into a receptacle, send it off for a genetic analysis, and then it comes back with a profile of your particular genetic array, and what it then does is it correlates your genetic array to a data bank, a library of genetic arrays, to give you both a description of what you are and have right now based upon the expression of particular genes, and correlates that to a whole set of traits, including cognitive, emotional, and behavioral traits. They then give you a little number, a little code. You go to this spit party, and they tell you that your little number, your little code is ideally partnered to individuals with this type of number or this type of code. So what they're doing is they're doing a form of genetic and phenotypic matching. It really is a subtle form of eugenics, but that's okay, because what they're really hoping is that you get together and mate, and so this is like the ideal partner. But what they're really doing there is something that I think has sort of factor to it. I can spit, send it off to someone, they'll come back and they can give me a pretty good picture. Now, some of it is a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's sort of like what I would call a genetic horoscope. But they can give me a pretty good picture of what at least the blueprint is for my structure and the way I may be predisposed to certain functions. Now, you know, good enough to mate with, good enough to marry, good enough to prosecute. Depending on your view of marriage, they would be the exact same thing. So what this then does is it really helps to predict structure-function relationships from the genome to what we call the proteome, to what we then call the neurome and connectome of the way things work in the brain. What is it we're measuring here, folks? What are we trying to do? We're trying to get, pun, our head around this. You'll get this on the way home and you'll laugh. So the idea of this old construct that I learned in school, is it nature or is it nurture? It's both. The idea is that certainly there is a genomic and genetic complement that is expressed, but the differential expression of that occurs through ongoing interactions of that embodied individual with their embeddedness in their environment, internal and external. And if we can assess these different variables at various points in time, we may be able to assess not only what this individual is, but we can then link these to various forms of data to have what's called a correlational prediction of the likelihood of what this individual may do, may be, may become, given interactions with certain types of environments. So what it's allowing us to do is to sort of get a handle on the interiority here, looking at genotypes, phenotypes, structure and function, correlating these things to the body, brain, mind. If you haven't seen this little symbol before, it's called a tilde. It means a complementarity. This is a nice way of me showing you that I'm not of the belief that brains are just sitting out there. I was single for a lot of years, never went on a date with a brain all by itself. Last time I checked, it's in a body. Look around, still holds. Moreover, bodies are embedded in their environments. So we know that there's sort of a complementarity function of the brain and what it does. This word mind, don't ask me to define that. You need to buy me lots of liquor before I'll even go there. And so what we find is that this then affects the state of the body, various sensations, perceptions and cognitions that then lead to behaviors that then come out and affect the way this individual interacts with its environment, that then feed back to its interiority and to its exteriority.
That's very, very important,
we can get our head
guys.
around.
That's very, very important, guys, because what he's showing right now, like how somebody's environment affects them and how that environment affects them, and then it goes back in the cycle and they're changed. It's conditioning them in certain ways. Negative reinforcement or positive reinforcement, that is used in our torture, in this, this experimentation on us, or whatever you want to call it. That is used. This little thing is so used in this, it's not funny. And they keep it going in a loop. They keep it going in a loop because what they're trying to do is tear us down. Our attackers in this program is trying to learn how to destroy people very well, while also collecting data off of them. So this little tree right here is very important in that. How to affect our environments, where, Brian too says sometimes, like, an organism can't survive in a constantly aggressive or a constantly negative environment. So they're trying to condition us with negativity all the time so that it changes the function of how our brain works, basically, of how we react to things and how we react to our environment. Give me 1 second, guys. I forgot to get a cold drink when I was getting my electronic cigarette charger. So give me another second. I'm sorry to have to go, but it's just 2 seconds. Just 2 seconds. I'll be right back. Kind of have to use the bathroom, but I'll hold it in. Okay, let's proceed.
This, and this, we may be able to predict this, or at least that's the idea. That's the idea twice. So, what are we really doing with this? What we're looking to do is we're looking to be in some ways predictive, and in both the medical and the social sense, prophylactic, which is a nice way to say preventive. This idea is not new. The idea of trying to understand the way certain characteristics...
Okay, I want to go ahead and stop. I know I'm stopping it a lot, but he's saying a lot of important things. So when he says preventive, So he's saying he's taken this angle of, if they can take neuroscience and understands people's behavior, this is basically what he's saying, kind of without saying it. He's saying that they can predict people's behavior. Now, if that behavior is going to be dangerous, then they can prevent that dangerous behavior. Now, we know as targeted individuals that that's the exact opposite of what he's talking about. Like, so they can prevent certain behaviors, right? With neuropredictive programming, with knowing how somebody's gonna behave. Now, in our case, because we've seen targeted individuals like Myra and May, and we've seen targeted individuals like the Navy Yard shooter, Aaron Alexis. We've seen a lot of targeted individuals. Well, it's not a large amount compared to how many targeted individuals they are, but they go out and they do negative, very negative things. Now, in those cases, what this program was trying to do was it wasn't trying to prevent these people who were just normal people before and wouldn't have hurt a fly. It wasn't trying to prevent them from going out and doing something bad. It was trying to actually enact that. It was trying to actually make them do those things and create a false flag. So this is a double-edged sword. This is I forget the other word for it, but if you can prevent, like with neuroscience and it being weaponized, like it has on us, if you can prevent negative actions, then what can you also do? You can create negative actions. So he's talking about, oh, this is the pros on there. Maybe he'll say it in the cons. Maybe he'll say it in the cons that you can actually push somebody into negative actions, which is what they're trying to do in all of our cases. They're torturing us, harassing us, to see what we'll do, to see what kind of negative things we're going to do. It doesn't prevent anything. It doesn't prevent anybody from doing, bad things. It only makes good people, and it's maybe 0.0001% of targeted individuals have done very violent things, but it still has happened. It wasn't prevention. It was creating that situation. It was tearing down somebody until they thought that they had no other choice but to do something violent. Now, I know that probably the people, watching my videos, if y'all resonate with me, those things are never going to help us. This is the way to beat them. Information is the way to beat them. Information is a more powerful weapon than anything in the society at this point. But it's ridiculous to say that neuroscience weaponized and how this will be used out in society, which they are using it out in society, and they're doing research and development, and it's field experimentation on people that didn't agree to be experimented on, saying that, hey, this could be a prophylactic. It could stop a lot of evil things. It could stop people from doing bad things, which is not in any case that I've seen what this program, what these protocols are trying to do. So I think that's just so ironic that he's saying that, that it could lead to preventing evil when all it's done is create evil.
Characteristics of genetics, somatic state, and function may predictively lead to individuals who fall outside of some predetermined Gaussian distribution that we, as individuals or a group, call norm. It's quite old. It started way back in the late 1800s with a fellow named Galton, spread all the way up to a fellow named Pearson. And then, of course, we really like to point fingers all around to other countries and go, oh, we know the work of von Verschuur and everything that was happening in the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute that became the Max Planck Institute that happened at the Tiergarten 4 Straße. Whoa. This is not those nasty Nazis once again. This was a very strong Anglo-European program that tried to identify, can we prevent the harms and ills of society by looking at the structure and function of what individuals are and may be, and pruning that in some way so that these things do not occur. Sort of
very ironic
the thing
he's saying that
before it gets too far down the slippery slope, because it's cheaper to do it that way. Well, those are the real end intended pros. And what I mean by real is that this has gotten some definitive use on the medical side. We certainly recognize that genomic medicine, genetic medicine, and the combined use of genomics, genetics, together with pharmacology, various forms of imaging, structural and functional analysis, has been important to helping to define and in some cases predict, in other cases intervene, genetically determined phenotypic expressions of a variety of different diseases and disorders that we can then jump in early and mitigate. Such things as phenylketonuria disorders, sensitivity to a variety of dietary issues, particular types of congenital hereditary disorders.
Now that's true. Okay, so I mean that's true, and I think that's what he's talking about. He's talking about in the medical community how neurogenomics and genetics, can prevent illnesses and things like that. That's true. But what I'm talking about is where these theories have actually been taken and used in our torture protocols, because they're using predictive neurotechnology to see what we're going to do this hyper game theory, and it's only leading to and you see where it becomes evil, where if they can they can give us certain stimuli and torture us enough that it doesn't lead to preventing evil, it actually leads to creating more evil in society. So from his point of view, what he's saying about medically, he's right. But he does know about this kind of stuff, and I don't see how he would think that this use, torturing people with neurotechnology and neuroweaponry, ever prevents somebody from doing evil, because it's done. Like, all the target individuals that I talk to are normal people who wouldn't hurt a fly and are just living normal lives, and then they've got a battle being murdered and trying to figure out what to do, being tortured 24 hours a day. So preventative in this case of target individuals is a joke.
Some cases we may even be able to recognize that there are longer-term trajectories. For example, now we're looking at forms of Parkinsonism, various forms of dementia, including Alzheimer's dementia, some of the other neurological disorders, saying, well, if we can understand the genetics and the environmental factors, we can intervene early and often, sort of like voting in Chicago, and we may be able to prevent at least the onset or delay the onset to some extent in such a way as to have some viable medical good. But what if the threshold isn't necessarily medical? Or what if the medical threshold spills over and we then say, well, could we do the same thing with regard to the potential for looking at things that may be socially disruptive?
Okay, so he said it. So he said it there, and that's bullshit. Because all of this targeting and all this research and development on us, on innocent citizens, that is, gosh, I mean, that kind of propaganda where he's saying they would only use this stuff to do preventative things for evil and social situations. That's just ridiculous. It's ridiculous, and I know that he knows this stuff is going on. Even at this point, when he gives this seminar, he knows that this stuff has been enacted by the military-industrial complex and is being used on citizens. And for him to say something like that is disingenuous. Or maybe he's just fantasizing and trying to be hopeful about the way that he wishes it was used or something like that. I don't really understand.
We have to be careful here, because there are what we call inherent cons to neurogenetics and neurogenomics. Most notably, that there is a stigmatizing potential. I am not necessarily my genes, and just because I may have a particular genetic complement for something doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to express it. However, if in fact you're doing serial testing of what we call my proteome and various proteins and metabolites, and you say, well, you're on the road, now just wait a minute. I may be on the road, but I feel just fine. Yeah, but you have, or you are. Yeah, but I feel fine. I don't do X, Y, and Z, but you will. Yeah. So that's number one. Number two is what we call the risk and burden of partial knowledge and we call interventional incapacity. We don't know exactly how all these things work, although we recognize that the idea of one gene creating a disorder is unlikely. More than likely, it takes many genes. Or what will happen is a single gene may lead to a whole host of potential disorders. But we may not have the capacity to do anything about it, at least not medically. So the idea is, if you can't do anything about it, should you even bring it up? And if you can't do anything about it medically, and you still define it as a problem, how are you going to handle that? There's a whole bunch of ways that society has handled that. So if I were to put all this together and sort of draw it into a pretty connect the dots picture for you, what are we trying to do with contemporary neurotechnologies to move towards some ways that are definitive on one hand, predictive on the other, and when I put them both together, definitive and predictive, that leads me to the possibility of being interventionally preventive. And I'm not saying how I'm going to prevent. I'm just saying I'm leading to that threshold. And we're not going to talk about the interventive stuff. You got to bring me back another time, and I'll talk to you all about that. And I'll really give you bad dreams. But this is what this looks like.
And what he's talking about there, he's talking about it there. Like, I'm not going to talk about it this time, but he's talking about this technology being used in society. And then they're propagandizing it as saying, oh, well, it can be preventative in certain populations of bad things happening. Preventing terrorism and stuff like that. It's complete propaganda because it's random experimentation on normal people and hurting them and murdering them and traumatizing them for behavioral control that does not lead to preventing shit. It creates a lot of violence from gang stalkers. It does, you know, in very, very sparse cases, leads to violence from targeted individuals, not us, not the people watching this video, not me, because I realize that is the worst thing we can do, because this is a whole society of false flags. You know, we have to be peaceful, we have to be smarter than them, and we have to use information as our biggest weapon. The pen is definitely mightier than the sword. Your keyboard is way more deadly than, you know, shooting some random people or even people you think that are your attackers. We can change a whole lot more with activism and getting awareness out than we could ever change with any kind of act that's going to pin us down as being crazy and unstable. Because then people will be like, oh, okay, well, that Myron Mays, he went out and shot random people. That's what the public thinks. You know, maybe he was going after his attackers or whatever, but it doesn't matter because they false flagged him. They said he was mentally ill and stuff like that. And they said that he claimed to be a targeted individual. So how does that make all of us look? And how much more danger does that put us all in? So, I mean, I think we all know that. I think people who come to my channel, you know, they think pretty much like I do. You know, we have much more power and information, and just putting information out like this, connecting the dots, just like he's doing here with these things. We got to connect the dots, build up just a strong foundation of proof that this stuff is going on. Now, you know, in this seminar, he hasn't really, you know, he hasn't really gone into activated neuro weapons in society, which he does in other seminars. But I want to show what he's researching and the things that he's looking into and the things that he is well versed in, because he is an advisor to the Pentagon. He is an advisor to the Pentagon on neuroscience, neurotechnology, and neuroweapons, and he's involved in a lot of these programs that are doing this to people. So it's important to know his background, where he came from, and the type of things that he's been thinking about for a while.
This is called a node-edge interaction of neuroscientific and neurotechnological capability for predictive intervention diagnosis. What we do is we take populational genomics and we understand the way these genes express in populations, and then we look at an individual. Where do you fall out in that particular population? And then I take a look at anatomy. And there's a whole bunch of different ways I can look at anatomy. I can look at you and look at what we call crude, superficial, external anatomy. And I can use a lot of those really pretty pictures to get to things like structural and functional imaging. Not only what are you built like, but how do the parts work, or at least relatively so, given the limitations and delimitations I have in my back pocket and bag of tricks. I then may begin to take a look at chemical biomarkers. This is actually biomarkers. It didn't come up real well. And what I mean by this is I can have a lot more specificity with regard to those chemicals that I can assay, not even necessarily from the brain, but from the blood, from the saliva, from the urine, that have some correlational index of what's going on in the brain. These are called representational biomarkers. The most recent report from Thomson Reuters listing of biomarkers suggests that there is about 300 to 400 biomarkers that have very, very high validity. And if we use these not alone, but in combination with other forms of assessment, we may be able to get a pretty good picture of what's going on and what could be going on. Then, of course, what we want to say is, this is all well and good, but what are the behaviors? This is the whole idea of sort of the Monty Python thing, is like, bring out your dead, and the guy goes, not dead yet. It's like, well, I haven't done anything yet. No, you may not have done anything really wrong yet, but I'm looking at your behaviors. I'm looking at the way you behave around children, pets, adults, in social circumstances. It's just not quite right. Well, we see particular behavioral characteristics, tendencies, and trends that with the right form of very, very highly specific analysis can be sharpened to suggest that these are what we call sentinel behaviors, that if we then get B, C, and D after we identify A, they're going to be yellow flags. If I get F, G, and H, boom, those are red flags. I correlate them with these, and I say, that's going to predict my social dynamics. Now, that's actually where we are right now. Paradigmatically, this is what we are trying to do. Now, that's Minority Report-ish enough, but the good news of that is that we're doing much of this in the area of pathologies of neuroscience, neurology, psychology, and psychiatry into well-identified disorders that apparently have multifactorial issues, contributions, etc., and have been very strongly defined in the past by their behaviors, and sometimes their behaviors alone, and by their social ramifications, one of them being the disorder which is known as psychopathy, formerly referred to as sort of social pathology or antisocial personality disorder. As you may or may not be aware, there's a new diagnostic and statistical manual, the American Psychiatric Association, that's due to come out about a year from now. So it hit the street in early spring 2013. There have been some new categorizations, and much of that relies upon how these are then depicted and a shift in some of the classifications of these disorders. But that notwithstanding, the idea...
Now it's a good example. It's a good example of people with these specialties, and especially when they're going to weaponize things like this. It's a good example of how they want to show the public the convenience of it, the good things that could come from it. You know, they want to show them that, you know, it can keep people safe when the opposite is true. When the opposite is true. I don't know one situation where somebody really bad has been targeted and kept from doing those bad things. All I know are target individuals who are normal people who are being tortured and their lives are destroyed. So what he's doing now is he's saying, you know, hey, we're doing this now. I mean, we're doing predictive. We're trying to predict, you know, behavior from, you know, from the way someone's brain works. And it'll help us in the future to say, hey, if somebody's doing this, this, and this, it can flag them from doing, you know, negative behaviors in the future. But right now, all I see is that normal people who don't have any plans to hurt anybody or never would are being hurt and their families are destroyed. So this research and development, it goes against what he's saying. So this is propaganda. This is that thing where it's like, oh, you know, everybody needs to get a chip in their hand because, and this is just an example. It's not really what has to do with us, but everybody needs to get a chip in their hand, or, you know, a chip so they can go into the supermarket and they can, you know, get their groceries, and they don't have to have a card. You can just walk out with your groceries. It's very convenient. It'll help society. And then what they really do is, if you do have a chip in your hand or something like that, then they can track you anywhere you go, and then they can maybe even send, you know, microwave pulses to your body or something like that. Now, that's not how it happens with a lot of us with implantation or anything. We're not told that, you know, hey, get a chip in your hand and you can go use this shop. But that's an example of saying how convenient it's going to be, how it's going to help society so much. And then it's not used like that at all. And then it's not used like that at all, because when the military-industrial complex gets its hand on something, it uses it for control. It uses it for control of the people and even depopulation. Depopulation, ripping down people's lives, seeing how fast they can destroy people, seeing how they can isolate people, seeing how they can discredit them, while collecting data on certain behaviors or what they can, you know, how they can manipulate that person's brain you know, for behavioral control, for behavioral conditioning. So I find it very disingenuous, and this is kind of like every new technology that has a dangerous side to it. And we know that this technology that they're using on us has a dangerous side to it, because it's destroyed our lives. You know, it's destroyed our families' lives. It's destroyed people's lives, and it hasn't prevented shit. It hasn't prevented shit. It's only created violence. We see it very starkly that with these new technologies, oh, this is so convenient. Yeah, it'll only be used to make society better. Then the military-industrial complex takes it and uses it to wage war. Not just wage war on other countries that they may deem dangerous, wage war on its own citizenry. So I find what he's doing very dangerous. It's very dangerous propaganda. It may be actually what he wishes to take place. But, you know, it's a lie. I mean, bottom line, he's lying.
Here is increasingly the community to which I belong, which is the neuroscience community, is being asked to do something in the face of such things like Columbine, Oslo, Phoenix, 9/11. There's a public call for this. They look to neuroscience and other forms of science as well, but particularly neuroscience. And can't you figure this out? Can't you figure out what a fill-in-the-blank brain looks like?
What's wrong with you?
Why aren't you getting that grant? Shouldn't you do this? And by the same token, when you say, yeah, we can, or at least get a pretty good idea, you then throw back to them and say, well, what do you want me to do about it? Why don't we just arrest somebody before they do it? You can't do that. No, you can't. At least not in this country, you can't. But what about if they have a high suspicion of... Now, my friends who work in clinical psychology and psychiatry will say, yes, but if in fact there is an increased risk of harm to self and others by virtue of expressed thought, continued ideation, and perhaps representative behavior, yeah, I'm not saying we don't have an out here. I'm not saying there aren't avenues and vectors, little niches and crannies in the gloss of what we call our social agenda that would allow us to perhaps do this. But the question then comes up, what can we really do and what should we do? And one of the things that's important to understand is how we will use these data. When we're looking at individual data, what we're trying to do is to get enough data across various points of the lifespan so that I can look at any particular point that I test you and say, I know what happened before, and I can see the trajectory you're going. That's the idea. Now, before you get the heebie-jeebies and think, oh, this is really creepy, this is the agenda of personalized medicine. I'm creepy about that.
Yeah, I'm totally creeped out by it because my family's being murdered by your research and development, by your experimentation on something that's supposed to be good, but is only evil. Yeah, creepy.
I know what you're made of. I know your predispositions. I know what you're expressing right now. I can narrow down what I can do like that. Because I'm able to utilize these data in such a way as to create a standard to understand what's going on in the, quote, you-ness of you. But not just you, because I can take these individual data across time and lifespan, and I can take a look at cohort data. What about people just like you? Or close enough to you that I can at least clump you together. And then I can compare you to populations of various sizes, including what is now known as the Global Population Data Registry, which you may have heard about the idea of the Big Brain Data Bank, which is moving to try to get aggregate data of neuroimaging and neurogenomic, neurogenetic data across whole populations to be able to provide these comparative standards. How do we know if these things are tending towards a particular trajectory? Now, we compare them to individuals like you who are close enough that we can say, well, take a look at the same, and she's going in one direction, she went that way before, so you're probably going to go that way too. Let's watch. And then we compare them to the whole population. This is what's called a comparative index or a comparative ladder going up. But you know, I can set standards here too. I can utilize what's known as populational indexes and standards to create a normative statistic that then comes down the other way and says, these are my norms. And if you fall outside those norms, then you're abnormal. And the way I do that is like this. This is nothing new. This is the new nomenclature that you will see increasingly in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual called spectrum effects. Our group, particularly a graduate student who worked with me, her name is Rachel Wertzman, and I spent a lot of time examining the concept, constructs, and phenomenon of the way various things are spectrum presented, going from a genomic representation to genes, to phenotypes, to behaviors. And what we find is that what you see is exactly this. I get a foundation of genetics that through interactions with an environment will produce particular physical characteristics that then will predispose me and allow me to engage in certain behaviors that then feed back in me. And ultimately what I see is I get some manifest effects. But this is an important line. Because although we're striving to define these things biologically, we still have to set the threshold of what we consider to be a cutoff point. When is short too short? I'm serious. We can do this across time. If this were 1890 and this were a pub in 1890, most of the people in the room would be about my size or a little shorter. Now, not so much. What about smart? How smart do I have to be really smart? IQ scores? Biomarkers? How sad do I have to be clinically depressed? How outside some norm of behavior do I have to be so that someone can take a look at my biology and her biology and his biology and go, very similar, it's going to put you on that curve. Let's not forget, these decisional thresholds are both clinical and social, but they are determined by institution and very often by consensus. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't do this, but I'm saying we need to be careful, number one, about where we set this, and number two, about what types of data we use to determine how to put somebody along this curve. So this is what we're doing right now. This is where we really see the science. What are we doing? We're identifying brain structure and activity that correlated to report cognitive emotional outputs and behaviors, and we're illustrating brain activities that are involved in certain reactions and behaviors. We're making these bidirectional correlations. What are the implications of that? This. We're linking brain states to cognitions, emotions, and behaviors, and we're reaching forward to the potential. And in some cases, we're being asked to scan brains and read minds. Can't you take neuroimages of what these people look like? And if you take enough of them and you put enough people who do these kind of things in a scanner and you get enough of these data bank, well then you can put people in the scan and you sort of get an image of what brain networks are being activated before they do this. Maybe. Then what? Therapy? Okay. Pull them off the street? For what? How? On what criteria? But there are actually people who are really asking for those criteria to be developed. And not in such a way that is maleficent, but in a way that has beneficent overtones of protecting society at large from individuals who may have biological and psychosocial characteristics and traits that are identifiable biologically and predictive of their psychosocial manifestations, which then gets us back to this, which is predicting cognitions, emotions, and behaviors from biological data. So what are the issues with this?
Yeah, so, I mean, this is absurd. It's getting me angry. I didn't watch the whole thing. Like, I watched a little bit of it. It's getting me very angry because, like, in the targeted individual community, and this, one thing that this video does that's good is it lays down a foundation for people who are like, oh, well, you know, you're not embassy workers. You're not somebody important. The government's not going to have any interest in y'all. That's just, throw that argument out. You watch this guy talking about it, and they just want a large, they want to learn more about every culture and every type of human being. They want more information on everybody and exactly how they work, because then they'll have more control over them. This really makes me angry that he puts it into this bent of doing something good with it and actually catching the bad guys, because that's not what they're doing with it. You know, it's actually a concern for me. This has been a real concern of mine throughout being a target and being hit and trying to make people aware of it, is that you know, there's this wall that, you know, if somebody who has not experienced this and is not being targeted directly by microwaves or non-ionizing microwave radiation, directed energy weapon systems, neuroweapons, if they do learn, so let's say somebody they're like, wow, this research, this experimentation on people who did not agree to it is actually going on. Then dummies who really trust authority are going to say, oh, okay, well, those people that they're doing it to, they must have some kind of predisposition to doing some bad things. And that's why the authority figures are doing it, because they're good and they're trying to protect normal people. That makes me very concerned and very angry, because that's not what's happening. Very normal people are being targeted. So everything that he's talking about, all these good outcomes of this, are not happening. They're not happening. None of it's going in this direction. It's mass experimentation on many normal people and normal families. And so that's not about preventing bad things from happening. That's about trying to create bad things. That's about trying to be able to control people more. It's about being able to understand people more so that they can hurt people. That you know, this hierarchy, the contractors, the DIA, CIA, Pentagon, the DOD, and all the intelligence agencies under it, and all these different protocols are destroying lives and trying to get good people to do bad things. It's a very big concern that, like, okay, when somebody does figure out that this is going on, but they don't really know a lot about it, are they just going to be idiots still and say, oh, well, it's authority figures that are doing this, and so they're obviously, you know, these people deserve this. These are bad people that did something wrong or maybe will do something wrong. And that is a lie. That is a lie. I mean, this is actually getting me pretty angry. But let's go ahead and wrap it up, guys. See what he has to say at the end of this.
There are many issues that arise from the technology itself and a pragmatic approach to assessing what the technology can and cannot do, and using that as the groundwork upon which to undergird the prudential question that I'll get to in a moment. These are the issues. What are we really imaging? In 5 or 10 minutes, I went through the pretty pictures and I showed you what these things were doing, and the caveat to each one says, yeah, they're pretty, but this is what they're doing, and we have to be careful when we use this. Obviously, there's also, what are we doing with the objective information? There are certain things that go along with what we call neurocyber issues of data banking. So if we bank enough data, who gets access to these data? For what?
Yep.
And I go one step further. This is a very useful enterprise, and it's one that I heartily endorse because of its tremendous benefit for clinical medicine. However, my cyber pundits, and I'm not a cyber pundit, tell me if something is stackable, it's hackable. And these data are stackable in data banks and increasingly in clouds. And it doesn't take much to just add one data point to change the entire trajectory, for example, in your genetic code, to then have you represented as being the potential for, predisposition of, or particularly even the expression of a disease state. That might have tremendous ramifications for how you're treated socially, economically, vocationally, etc. These then bring in some of the predictive nature of what these techniques and technologies are doing, and the continuous risk of misperception. We have to really make sure that if these are data we're cutting through, that we're utilizing a razor's edge to make these cuts, and not doing so in a broad and cavalier way, because we then fall into what's called naming, framing, claiming, and blaming errors.
Okay, so let's stop it there. I mean, that's what they're doing to target individuals. You know, that's why we get gang stalked. We get gang stalked because people in the community are told some kind of lie. They're told we're crazy. They're told we've done something wrong in the past. They're told we're maybe a drug addict or something like that, and that we need to be watched. That's what's already occurring. It happened right out of the gate. Right out of the gate, when the military-industrial complex started researching and developing and experimenting on people and their families, right out of the gate, they just started lying to people because they were the authority, and they can just choose, oh, okay, yeah, because false flagging, because our culture is a culture of false flags and lying. So how can it be used in a non-deceitful way to prevent evil from happening when right out of the gate, right when this technology was mass manufactured and many people started getting experimented on, people have been experimented on with this stuff, you know, since like probably the 1970s. No, 1950s, probably the 1950s. Not as many as in the 1990s, the 2000s, and up till now. But right out of the gate and up till now, it's not being used to catch bad people. It's being used to frame people, to false flag people. And if something this big is being done to a person, then, you know, and a lot of the people who gang stalk have no idea what's going on anyway. But let's say maybe some of them do. Maybe some of them know that that person is being monitored, like their brain is being monitored or something. And the people that are monitoring or remote neural monitoring somebody, they put it out to the people who do know that somebody's being monitored and being hit with electromagnetic weapons, that, yeah, this person's dangerous. So we're, you know, targeting them. We're targeting them and seeing what makes them dangerous. And you've got a gang stuff. You know, you see how dangerous what he's saying, and that he's lying. I mean, this is propaganda and lies. And maybe in his fantasy world, he saw this all helping society, but it's not what the military-industrial complex is doing. It's hurting society. So this makes me very angry when it's totally just skewed and said, oh, well, here's all the good things that could happen, but they're not actually the good things that are happening. There's nothing good about this. False flagging people, experimenting on them, trying to make them feel like they've done something wrong when they're normal people, and then murdering them and hurting their family, you know. Just it's very weird. But the importance of this video, though, is that for anybody who says, okay, well, you know, the people who are doing this research and, you know, surveilling somebody's brain, or, you know, doing any of this, they would have no interest in normal people. Actually, that's very incorrect, and it's actually the opposite. They have more of an interest in normal people because then it doesn't get into the news like it did with the embassy workers, but also because they're trying to just line up, well, from what he's saying, they're trying to line up similar personalities. Now, what he's saying is the total opposite of it. What's actually happening is they're looking for non-compliant personalities that are really good people that will speak out against tyranny. Brave people, different kinds of thinkers that don't just go along with the group. They're trying to figure those people out and figure out how to destroy them. And this is just one angle. I know that targeting happens for many other reasons, but this is 100% there. They're trying to figure out how to incapacitate and make it so that people do not listen to people who are non-compliant and would go against tyranny. They want to take those people who will not get just involved with groupthink and be totally happy, people who would speak out for the truth and right things. They want to figure those people out while murdering us and destroying our families, figuring out how to incapacitate us, but also understanding that personality more, so that they can destroy a person like that in the future, know exactly the kind of methods that they need to bring that kind of person down. So I just want to throw that in there, but this video really is good for just showing that this stuff is being done. I mean, he's saying that. He's saying right now, you know, we're experimenting on this stuff. We're experimenting on people's personalities and how to control them and how to prevent things from happening, which is not true. That is not true. It's actually the opposite. A lot of things that are really happening with targeting are the opposite of what he's saying. They're trying to make things happen. The military-industrial complex is trying to create false flags, and it's trying to incapacitate people who are non-compliant. And it's also trying to make them do violent things by murdering them and, you know, isolating them and backing them into a corner to see what they'll do. You know, so it's good to hear him talk about this technology, in neuroscience, and he has that other seminar where he talks about neuroscience being weaponized. The claims that he's making on where this is going is completely upside down. And I think he knows that. I think this is him. I think this is Dr. Giordano, kind of his wishing that it was like this, wishing that it was moral, but it's not. Because it's done by the military-industrial complex. And the last thing that you would use to describe the military-industrial complex is moral. The last thing that I would ever use to describe the military-industrial complex is moral. So let's let him wrap it up here.
We name a particular thing as X. We make particular frames of its normality or abnormality. We then make particular claims about what that normality or abnormality predicts and subtends within our psychosocial realities, and then we put the blame. And oh, by the way, what we got to do is take care of that. We need to pull them off the street. We need to make sure they're getting care. Well, they don't get care. They can't get care. So obviously, these take on not only
this completely false. The way that he's saying that this is used is just
opening the door for
completely wrong.
And of course, the intersection
and
of
irresponsible to say the least.
Is the groundwork for then the legal issues. Are these issues sufficient to ground legal decisions that deal with things like capacity, capability, culpability, and intervention? And there are certain standards that are extant right now. One that deals with the relative use of these data, which is called Fry standards, and the other that refer to the reliability of utilizing these techniques to make these predictions, and these are called Daubert standards. But these are standards that are decided in judicio. They are decided at the bench based upon the casuistic nature of previous cases that are paradigmatic. And so what happens here is we see these change as a consequence of how these technologies are being used and how often they're being used. Use something often enough, suddenly it becomes the standard. And this is one of the things that's now taking on a tremendous voice in the international neuroethics, legal, and social issues literature. There's some good work being done here in this country. There's also an expert center at Friedrich Wilhelm University.
Yeah, okay. Well,
really.
Okay, Mr. Giordano, like if this is being discussed with neuroethics and the international community and all this crap, why are they not pulling this technology off of innocent people who are being tortured to death for their whole lives? Ethics. If you want to talk about ethics, why are they not stopping the misuse of these technologies to do this to innocent people who have done no wrong? And especially lying about these people so that they're harassed constantly, like me and you guys who are watching this. If he wants to talk about ethics, he needs to come out and say what's really happening. This is it's infuriating me. I think I'm going to have to wrap up this video soon, guys.
So what we see then is we're facing these very real social tensions.
Okay. All right. So what did you guys think? What did you guys think about this? I'm going to come see what's going on in the chat room real quick. Kind of started to get very angry at the end. I didn't know he was going to go into all that about like, oh, how great this is going to be because we can catch criminals and stuff like that, which is bull, which is complete bull. Hey, Lily. Hey, Axe. Hey, Carrie. Pretty, it's like 6:51 in the morning. I'm glad y'all came. Yeah, I just wanted to go through that video. I may do another live stream this weekend. I know this one was late, so not a lot of people were probably up. But yeah, I'm probably going to do another live stream. I'll probably do it like during the day on Sunday or something like that. I hope y'all got something out of this, and I just want to put more foundational evidence that people like James Giordano and other neuroscientists are involved. They're involved with helping people, helping these people who are murdering us and microwaving us to understand how the brain works and figure out protocols of putting stimuluses in our environments to then get the behavioral reactions that they want and then get data out of all that. But it's not being done to people who are maybe criminals or maybe are doing something wrong. It's being done to really good people who've never done crimes, and then trying to harass them and hit them with microwaves and do all this stuff to maybe make them do something violent for false flags, because that's how our society is. That's how our hierarchy runs. Yeah, Lily, I kind of think that sometimes too. That maybe this did start for me at an early age. But all right, guys, I'm gonna kind of wrap it up. I got to go to the convenience store, and I haven't eaten yet. But just wanted to go through another James Giordano video and kind of comment on it and get that evidence out there. He really spins things, like towards the end, he really spun things to a level that is just, it's more than irresponsible, it's dangerous. And I think it's just his fantasy world of how he maybe wants these weapons to be used. But then he goes ahead and he participates. He participates in the experimentation and torture of innocent Americans, working with the Pentagon, working now in London for another brain mapping project. All right, guys. So I'll probably see y'all this weekend or Monday or something like that. And if you have any good articles, or information, good YouTube videos or whatever, like really good interviews that you just got a lot out of, please send them to my email, vulcanwolverine@gmail.com. God bless and protect you guys. If you're getting the remote neural manipulation pulsing in your body, like in your back or in your jaw or in your torso or in your groin or just anywhere you're getting pain, please try these grounding straps. They're really, really helping me, give me a lot more energy. All right, I will talk to y'all later. I love you guys. Stay strong and hang in there. God bless and protect you and your families. All right, guys, I'll see you all on the next one.